Hello everybody, welcome back to Two Wheeled Lifestyle, my short little video series where I talk about making the transition from a car to a motorcycle. So on our first episode we talked about gear, reliability, cheap, versatility, that kind of stuff. On this episode we're going to talk about two different things. We're going to talk about your gadgets and your bike. Mostly just because gadgets doesn't really fit in its own category because I don't own enough yet. So, starting out for gadgets. As you may notice, I have a lot of stuff on my helmet. And what I'm going to define a gadget is here is any unnecessary item that makes your ride better, easier, safer, etc., or just even more enjoyable. So the first gadget I want to talk about is a Bluetooth headset. Now I can't ride without tunes, or podcast, music, anything like that. If I'm commuting to work, I've got to have it. So I have this little guy right here, and I used to ride with headphones, I used to ride with earbuds in, but they didn't block wind very well, and they didn't really, the sound wasn't very good at highway speeds because I'd have to turn them up so stinking loud, they'd start distorting really bad. Also, they'd always pop out when I was trying to put my helmet on. It was just a pain. So, dropped the 80 bucks on this, another 20 on the speakers, and I got myself, what I consider to be a pretty solid little Bluetooth headset. And also, it makes riding much more enjoyable when you're riding with somebody who has one of these headsets. When I went on my ride with Everride in Utah, I actually wound up, we were able to talk the whole time, and it was really good. It also made it a lot safer because when you wiped out, instead of waiting for the other person to figure out, oh wow, he hasn't come around this corner yet, maybe I should wait or go back, you could immediately hear my blood-curdling girlish scream as I hit the ground. So it really added a lot there. Also, another gadget that I considered pretty indispensable at this point is a handlebar mount. And I use my phone as my GPS, my media player. I use it for everything. So having it mounted to my handlebar in a central location, actually where my camera is now, is really good because, if I get a call while I'm on the bike, I can see, who is that's calling, if I want to take it or not, or I can adjust my music, quickly glance down for directions. It's great. So also, and this is very related, but I've talked about this before, earplugs. I consider those something of a gadget, but closer to a safety feature piece of gear. And those, if you're commuting to work on your bike, and so you're riding on the highway every day, those are not really an optional piece of gear at that point. You need to protect your hearing because it's the only shot you got at doing so. So that's what I would recommend there. Wear your earplugs, they'll save your hearing, they're cheap, and now I'm off that soapbox. So this brings us to the bike. Now, there's three things that you want to look for in a bike if you're going to try to make this switch. You got rideability, reliability, and maintainability. Not sure how many of those three were actually words, but hey. And so rideability, I'd kind of messed with different names for this category while I was working up the script for this vlog. And so first I called it ergonomics, called it comfort, excitement factor, and it's really all of those things. Really, it's how comfortable you are on the bike, but really rideability is your subjective measure of how much you want to ride your bike. And if you're uncomfortable on the bike, you're not going to want to ride it. If it's not a fun bike to ride, if it doesn't excite you, you're not going to want to ride it. If it's impractical, any of those things, you're not going to want to ride the bike. And if you don't want to ride the bike, if you dread getting on there every day, then this isn't going to work. It's not going to work out in the long term. Which brings me to reliability. And this is not like, short-term maintenance issues, anything like that. This is a measure of how many miles you can reasonably expect to get out of your bike before you're looking into replacing major stuff like the engine or the frame, or the kind of things that would normally total a bike if it weren't for the fact that you loved it. So, the easiest way, you can stick with brand loyalty and stuff like that. Honda's being reliable is such a well-known thing that at this point you could probably just buy whatever Honda's trying to sell you and you'll be all right. However, the biggest and easiest way to find out how reliable a bike is to poll large numbers of people that use the bike. Now, this is ordinarily an impractical idea, except that forums exist. And you can go on a web forum, and you can look up, what kind of miles people are getting out of these bikes. You can look and see, people will brag about that stuff in their signature blocks, there are DR650 riders on the ADV Rider forum that are talking about 75,000 miles out of their bike. And that's incredible. Or there's a guy on YouTube who actually has posted videos of his CBR 600 rolling over 100,000 and then 200,000 miles. And he said, you know, I've given it oil, I've given it gas, and I've given it tires, chains, sprockets, but the engine's been fine. So you want to look at stuff like that just to see, you know, how long can I ride this bike? Because, you know, people look at a car with 100,000 miles the same way they look at a bike with 10,000 miles. It's a lot of miles on a bike. And so when you start looking at putting the same kind of miles on a bike that you would normally put on your car, you start, you know, all those little maintenance schedules really become important to look at. You know, when you start looking at the difference between a bike with 7,000 mile valve adjustment intervals compared to, like, I think one of Yamaha's bikes is like an 18,000 or a 14,000 mile interval, it really starts adding up. And so also that brings us to maintainability. And that is how easy it is to do those regular maintenance items on your bike. The biggest thing here is that the harder it is to do it, the more likely you are to let it slip. So you don't want it to be this really, you know, big deal, this hard thing to do, you know, your valve adjustments or to do spark plugs, air filter, anything like that. You know, like on dual sport bikes, it's really easy to get at darn near everything, you know, because there's a lack of fairings in the way. They're usually much more simply constructed. And so, you know, you have that working for you. Whereas, you know, on like a full-fledged touring bike, you've got a lot more plastics in the way that you got to cut through. Like on sport bikes, on my Ninja, to replace the air filter was actually kind of a pain in the butt because you had to take the fuel tank off. Whereas, let me get past this guy. Whereas with a, you know, with a dual sport, it's just, you know, 4 bolts on the underside of one of the panels. So that's one thing you really need to look at. And, you know, like I said, if it's hard to do the maintenance and you don't want to do the maintenance, you're probably going to find an excuse, you know, I'll do it next weekend. I've got some beer to drink this weekend, I'll do it next time. And then next weekend you'll have something coming up. Before you know it, your bike has run 10,000 miles without getting a major service item that it needs. So I don't want to scare anybody off of this whole thing. I mean, and really, maintenance, that's something I've talked about before. That's something everybody needs to do, whether it's your daily driver or not. It just so happens that it becomes a lot more important when that's your only mode of transportation. You know, you really need to stay on top of it. So, like I said, I don't want to chase anybody off here. It is still one of the coolest decisions I've made. It is one of the greatest things, and it really adds a lot of fun and excitement to what is ordinarily the worst part of your day, if you think about it. Like, going to work, no matter how fun and exhilarating it may be, you know, I could work at the top of the crest and get to ride the crest every day. But if I wind up at work, I'm already not looking forward to it. So when your bike can spice up that part of your day, you're already starting off every day on a good note. So anyways, that'll do it for today. It's Dusty Skeeto signing off.